Chapter 12, The Police. Introduction. The demands on the police are contradictory and confusing when dealing with kids who break the law or are victims of abuse and neglect. Police often don't know the age of a suspect until after they've taken actions. Police management of juveniles is the most often dictated by the courts, laws, and officer discretion. The police are typically the first contact that young victims and delinquents will have with the juvenile justice system. Police must balance what is best for the youth with what is best for the community. Kids aren't considered to be completely responsible for their actions. The police must deal with some or all of the major socializing institutions, parents, families, schools, and neighborhoods with nearly every juvenile arrest. Police often are almost a juvenile court themselves based on their powers of discretion. History of juvenile policing. Early juvenile justice was handled by parents with the support of local authorities. There was no juvenile court or separate juvenile detention until the 20th century. Police were the intermediate step between local institutions and 20th century juvenile court. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the police dealt with kids in three ways. The police decided which cases they would handle informally and which ones to push to the adult courts. The police used discretion to round up delinquents for minor offenses, and the police used detention as a swift punishment. During the early 20th century, the police resolved many juvenile delinquency cases without involving the juvenile court. From 1930 to 1940, the Juvenile Bureau of Los Angeles Police disposed of half of all of its cases within the department. After 1940, the police handling of juveniles shifted away from order maintenance, largely due to police professionalism. The social work function of the police helping kids in trouble was provided largely by police women. Dealing with juvenile delinquents and victims from the viewpoint of the police officer, age is an artificial criterion for determining how dangerous a suspect is. A youth can be just as dangerous as an adult, if not more. Juveniles are difficult and challenging for three reasons. The police must deal with juveniles quite often, especially teenagers. Juveniles are more likely than adults to hold negative attitudes toward the police, and juveniles commit a significant percentages of offenses. Youths can be both offenders and victims. The police still must act in the youth's best interests. The police are guided by the juvenile justice mission to rehabilitate delinquents and divert potential delinquents. Specialized juvenile policing. 3 units within police departments have the most contact with juveniles. They are special juvenile units, including gang units, juvenile officers, and patrol officers. Patrol officers most often deal with status offenders and take juveniles into custody. Juvenile offenders are skilled at interrogating juveniles, have a variety of juvenile contacts, experienced in handling difficult parents, and a variety of dispositions, as well as juvenile delinquents and their situations. Juvenile units. Larger departments have specialized juvenile units. Some officers might be assigned as school resource officers. They work with juvenile courts and youth service workers. They're responsible for handling cases of abuse and neglect. Gang units. In cities with gang problems, police departments will assign several officers to the gang unit. Gang officers understand graffiti and gang rivalries and are better able to apprehend gang members. Neglected and abused children. Officers are often the first official to become aware of a case of child abuse or neglect. Cases are quickly turned over to Child Protective Services. Officers have a lesser role as compared to delinquency cases. Status offenders. Status offense laws apply only to juveniles. Often the easiest type of case for police. Status offenses include curfew violations, underage drinking, underage driving, truancy, and running away. Violent juveniles. If the violence is bad enough, the police have only the last option, which is referral to the juvenile or criminal court. A third option, referral to an alternative social program, might be possible. Discretion can lead to one of 4 outcomes: doing nothing and ending the status offense, taking the juvenile into custody with release to parents, referral to an alternative social program, or referral to the juvenile court. Violence curtails discretion, however. The 2 types of strategies for dealing with gun violence. Offender-oriented responses targets a small group of serious offenders with a specific message, requires community support, effective communications, social services, and searching for and seizing juvenile guns. Place-oriented responses Focus on high-risk places at high-risk times. Procedure, what the police do. Most juvenile suspects enter the system through police contact. Police also divert many juveniles from the system using their own discretion. Station adjustment, the police department deals with the offenses, then releases the juveniles. Procedure, what the police do, taking into custody. This pie chart illustrates the disposition of arrest of juveniles from 2003, how many are handled by police, how many are referred to the juvenile court, and how many are referred to the adult criminal court. Taking into custody. Custody must meet one of two standards. Number one, probable cause. A reasonable person would conclude that there's a high probability that an offense is being or has been committed. Or number two, reasonable suspicion, a lower standard than probable cause. Officers need 30% suspicion that offense has been committed or that the youth needs supervision. Two classes of encounters are common. Patrol, police are on the street, and they might be called to the scene or witness suspicious activities, or through investigations, juvenile officers make inquiries in the field or at the station when they investigate problems that are part of their caseload. Disposition of juvenile arrest. This pie chart illustrates the disposition of juvenile arrest, how many are handled by the police, how many are handled by the juvenile court, how many are handled by the criminal court, and how many are handled by other agencies. Booking. Fingerprints and photographs. Officers may fingerprint or photograph youths or collect their DNA. Many states now retain juvenile records, not allowing them to be sealed, expunged, or destroyed, and some states now allow sealed records to be opened. Search and seizure. An officer may conduct a search without a warrant or probable cause if the subject gives consent. Courts evaluate a juvenile's ability to consent by considering whether the search was voluntary based on the totality of circumstances, and school ground searches are legal. Interrogation. Juveniles have the same Miranda rights as adults, and they should be given a juvenile Miranda. 3 amendments regulate police interrogations, and those include the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments. Custody. Police must treat juveniles in custody differently than adults. 4 core protections. The institutionalization of status offenders, separation of juveniles from adult offenders, removal of juveniles from adult facilities, and reduction of disproportionate minority contact where it exists. The demands of the law. The three legal factors that most influence taking a juvenile into custody are the seriousness of the offense, frequency of the offense, prior current involvement with the juvenile justice system. Demands of the situation that officers must consider: attitude, family, complaint, style of policing, friends, individual traits, and systematic characteristics. A bias. A certain level of bias is inherent in the juvenile justice system. This bias is both overt and unconscious on the part of officers and can include racial, gender, and social class issues. Overt examples: officers targeted specific neighborhoods, gangs, and offenses, or unconscious, some issues are organized by race. Racial discrimination by the police. Unconscious because of the societal bias against minorities. The effects of discrimination compound throughout the system, and bias is difficult to measure. Sex discrimination by the police. 2 aspects of the police treatment of juvenile girls. Chivalry. Girls are presumed to be less dangerous, and their delinquent behavior is assumed to support boys. And protection. Most apparent with the status offenses, girls are dealt with most harshly. Controlling police discretion. Police guidelines should cover or include restricting the law, guidelines for discretion because kids are subject to so many laws. Written guidelines would largely eliminate discretion focused on sex, race, or ethnicity, and training on the law, departmental procedures, and youth development. 3 strategies for what police can do to help: prevention, community policing, an old idea, return police to the streets. Problem-oriented policing deals with the specific recurring patterns of activity and addresses underlying causes that promote law violation. And zero-tolerance policing, which uses discretion to invoke the full brunt of the law, even for minor situations. That concludes this narrated PowerPoint presentation.